Howdy folks, this is Chuck from Thunder Mountain Bikes, and today we're going to go over a pre-ride bike check. All right, so one of the first things I like to check is tire pressures. It's a very common thing to overlook and underestimate how valuable it is. But it's just a quick check. Unthread your press-to valve, turn on your pressure gauge. I like a digital gauge, it's nice and easy to see the screen. You just put it on. I usually like about 25 to 27 PSI, usually a little bit higher on the rear for myself. But 25 is a good starting point if you don't know exactly where you enjoy riding your tire pressures at, but you can refine that in time. The next thing I like to check, depending on if the conditions have changed, say a very drastic change in temperature, I'll check my suspension. So if it's already been set up once, I usually don't make huge adjustments to it or check it like every single ride, but say you go from a hot place to a cold place, it's a good time to check the pressures because it can change. And you can just use a shock pump to connect to the top of the fork here, and then the shock will be on the backside here, in this case on this Evil Reckoning. One of the things we factor into our rentals here when we set them up for you is your body weight. So we'll set up the suspension for you. We usually have a target number that we're aiming for. You can set it up for exactly what you want if you know the bike and you know the suspension. Same with the tires. We like to get it in about a certain range for a certain body weight. So upper 30s for heavier folks, and then we'll go all the way down to about 20, a little bit over 20 PSI for the lighter folks. Another thing I'll do is I'll just give my brakes a quick squeeze, make sure that they're biting where I think they should be biting. If the throw is getting too long, it might be a couple of things. You might want to check the brake pad wear, or your brakes may need a bleed. And that's always a good thing to catch before you get out on the trail, because if you have brake failure on trail, it's gonna be a bad day. Another thing I like to check is the headset. So what I'll do is I'll put my fingers on the frame and this bearing, and what I'll do is I'll hold the front brake and kind of wiggle the bike. I'll try to see if there's any play in there. You'll notice it knock if it's very loose. What you wanna do is loosen up these bolts and tighten down this bolt to increase the compression on the bearings on the headset. And then once you notice that play is gone, you can go ahead and tighten these bolts up, making sure that your bars are aligned with your fork and your front wheel, and you're good to go. So another thing I like to examine is the drivetrain. Chain ring, cassette, and my jockey wheels on the derailleur. What I'm looking for is cleanliness. So I want to make sure that there's enough lube on the chain that it's going to be moving quietly as I'm pedaling, because I hate a noisy chain. If it's squeaking or anything, it's worth applying a little bit of lubrication to the chain of your preference. And then just making sure there's no gummy buildup around the chain ring or the cassette and pulley. That usually leads to bad shifting over time. So I like to address that usually post-ride, but pre-ride's good to make sure that it's all in good shape. Another thing I like to check, especially riding a bike that has axis, is your battery. A lot of people forget about these and they go out on a ride and their battery is dead. So just make sure that your battery's been charged sometime recently, or just throw it on the charger every now and then just to make sure you've got a solid charge. Same thing with the remote. The remote has its own battery, and that's worth carrying a spare one if you need it, but make sure in the last year you haven't changed it, it's probably time to change it. So another thing I like to check is the dropper post. I'm looking to make sure that the stanchion is nice and clean. If it gets gunky, you can use something like Slick Honey or Strand Butter to apply a little bit of lubrication to the stanchion itself. Some dropper posts allow you to raise the collar up so you can put a little lubrication underneath it, which is definitely helpful for the seals. And then some bikes or bike dropper posts have a reset valve, so you'll get a little bit of play there. So you can see on this dropper post, there's a little bit of play in the top of that, so you can reset this. In this case, this is the bike yoke. You can turn that a slight bit with a 4mm Allen key. You can drop it down and let it kind of bleed out that extra air there, release it, and then when you get it back up, it's good to go. Another part of the dropper system I like to double check is just that the cable action is good and moving freely. So that way when you press it, the seat goes down, it's not floating around or doing anything weird. If I want to change the adjustment on this, you can back out this barrel adjuster to make it tighter, and then if it's too tight, if you find that the dropper post is activating too easily, you can turn this back in and it'll alleviate some of that tension on the cable and make it easier to use the dropper lever. And that completes our pre-bike check. I hope that was helpful for you, And I hope you learned a couple like tidbits of the way we go about doing things around here. For more awesome content like this, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.